Thank you for joining our October webinar and our 10th episode in the 2024 Road to Resilience Learning Series. Today we're going to be talking about measuring performance and taking a look at how we're doing. And because this is the 10th month, I thought it was about time that we heard from the back seat in the car, are we there yet? It was just sort of my joke as being a child and a parent and going on a journey. My name is Linda Nelson, and I will be speaking with you today, as I have been speaking with you all year this year on our Road to Resilience journey. If this is the first time you're attending, this is part of a series that you can watch on demand on our YouTube channel as well. And if you'd like to have an attendance recognition, earn your Road to Resilience badge, as we're calling it, just go ahead and attend on demand and let us know that you've completed them, and we'll mark you down. So we've been on this journey and we have been moving along. Last month we talked about what have we learned so far and talked about being a learning organization. Today we're going to look at performance management, and next month in November it's our last in the series. And trying to figure out, did we end up in the right place? Is this where we really want to be? So with our agenda today, really what we're looking at is how can we improve how we evaluate our performance? So we're looking at continual improvement and performance management and actually improving how we're doing that. So we're going to talk about agile performance management and how you can move from more traditional to a more iterative model, looking specifically at the agile audit process as a tool for measuring performance, the agile finance function, and really using the analytical power of finance to help us with our measurement of our performance. And finally, looking at what probably you're most interested in, which is your personnel performance management, making that as agile as possible so that you can increase collaboration as well as continual improvement. This recording will be available on our ICO webpage and YouTube channel in a couple of days. If you have to leave for any reason, you can finish it up there. We should have time for questions today. There are 4 polls, so that might take us a little bit of time, but if you have questions or comments throughout the webinar, please feel free to use that. If we end up having questions after the webinar, you can put them into the post-webinar survey as well. And just a reminder, you do have to attend 35 minutes in order to get your certificate of attendance. So I wanted to start with, why are we talking about this? And so when we look at what makes organizations more or less resilient, obviously continuous improvement, continual improvement, and innovation is a big aspect of that. And so as an outcome statement for our capability assessment, we state that the organization encourages and creates a culture of continual improvement and innovation across all personnel and commits to validate and continually improve its organizational resilience activities and capabilities. When we look at specific strategies for doing that, we look at exercising and testing, having that culture of learning, and which we talked about last month. And today we're going to look at the agile audit methodology, the reliance on the finance function to determine what is and what is not generating value, as well as general overall performance management. With our organizational resilience model, also under continual improvement and innovation, we have the continually improves strategy. And in order to continually improve, you have to measure performance. And so our outcome statement for that is that organizational resilience is improved or increased when organizations continually monitor their performance against predetermined criteria to learn and improve from experience and to take advantage of opportunities. And we need that culture of continual improvement across really the whole organization, its people and its systems, to ensure that organizational objectives, strategies, and procedures are kept relevant and appropriate while supporting the changing needs of the organization. So one of the things that I've been asked in the past to do is make some of these things more specific. So we're going to share with you a strategy to increase your performance management capabilities. And so that the key part of the strategy is that you need to strengthen your data collection methodologies and processes. And with all of the tools that we have today available to us, which are really totally different than even 10 years ago, it's really important that organizations are really in the moment and understanding the importance of data collection and how to get that data. And so what we're trying to do for our strategy is to use data to continually empower decisions and the value agenda of the organization, and that it uses predictive analytics and performance management to operate agilely. And the organization's people also analyze their performance. So this is the strategy under strengthening data collection as an example. So a strategic objective might be to build data-rich systems for managing change, continual improvement, and innovation. And so this organization's decided that they're going to design systems to anticipate, plan, and respond to change, and that management will use ongoing monitoring reports to track trends in the data and use that to evaluate resilience. A second objective might be that you're going to try to make your finance management function more agile and make sure that they're the go-to source for decision support, because they can deliver analytic insight that can drive strategy and provide real-time insight into the state of the business from a financial perspective. And so as part of this strategy, we want to make sure that data is used to inform all decisions, all your forecasting and managing change. And to do that, the organization is going to need to automate some of its processes in order to increase both its agility and flexibility to respond to that. So we look at what kinds of capabilities will be outcomes of strengthening our data collection. Well, the first thing is that you're going to determine objectives for your resilient strategy and develop those measurement criteria around the data collection that are going to be used to monitor and evaluate the status and looking at those different attributes and indicators. They need to use ongoing monitoring reports to track trends and use that to evaluate where you are on your resilient strategy or any other strategy. That you're using technology tools to help you with that, like artificial intelligence or intelligent automation, machine learning, etc. They're all used to manage change and inform decisions. To help the finance function to do that, being able to automate transactional processes in order to provide a high degree of scalability and agility, take some of the manual out of the finance function, and really relying on the finance function to help the organization to understand what is and what is not generating value. That your talent management and your HR personnel hire people who will improve the finance functions as well as other areas, but this is specific to data collection, both its strategic influence and management guidance. And finally, that within that finance function itself, that the organization is using centers for financial planning and analysis, for example, and centralizing finance-related subject matter expertise. So these are some of the big picture items I wanted to start with before we took a dive into performance management. Where are you on this, on this scale? Are you at the poor, at the excellent, or somewhere in between? So generally, performance management, if I'm going to use kind of a definition to get us started, is really the process of ensuring that a set of activities and outputs meet the organization's goals in an effective and efficient manner. That performance management can focus on the performance of an organization itself, the whole thing. It can focus on the performance of a department, an employee, or on particular processes that you have in place to manage particular tasks. It's also the managing of an employee or system performance and aligning those objectives. And this really helps to facilitate the effective delivery of both strategic and operational goals. So what we're going to talk about is, this is just regular performance management. How can we make performance management more agile? So traditional performance management is really based a lot of times on time. You have your annual audit, whether it's internal or external. You have maybe quality assurance types of assessments where you're looking at, is what we're doing aligned to the requirements as defined in our policy? Are our suppliers meeting our requirements? Maybe you're due self-assessments of management systems or other systems that you have in place. If you have a management systems in place, especially if you have more than one, definitely management reviews would be part of that process, and performance appraisals. The real challenge here with all of these traditional performance management methodologies is they're often conducted annually. So here it's only the end of October. If you look at how many changes you've had in your organization since January, or I'll even give it since December, because usually the planning for the next year is happening before that next year begins. Think about all of the, I guess, not necessarily strategic objectives, but project objectives and other objectives that have changed. Maybe you're now working on a totally different team than you were on when you put together your own performance objectives. And so this is really the challenge, is that our traditional ways of measuring performance and really managing performance are outdated, and they're too far away from what's happening today to be as much value as they should be. And so we need to look at an iterative approach. And the word agile is the easiest, in my mind, the easiest term to use, because this is something that many of you have heard of, I'm sure. This is not something new. Agile project management has been in place for a very, very long time. But it's really time, I'll use the word time again, for management and performance management to be moved from a time-based approach to an iterative or agile approach. And so whether you're using the word sprints or iterations, whatever words that you're using, it doesn't really matter. But this idea is, how can we take what we're doing and put it into smaller pieces so we can get data out that's relevant and accurate, and we get it when we need it versus waiting to sometime in the future. And so really the main benefit of agile project management, in my mind, just big picture, and this isn't something that I'm an expert on, so those of you that do this day to day could say that there might be other main benefits, but really, in my mind, the primary benefit is the ability to respond to issues as they arise throughout the course of a project. And we can look at these different methodologies to measure performance, and each of those is a project. So while Agile Project Management was originally designed for production and for producing new technologies, specifically software types of things, it can be used with most, I won't say the word all, because I know somebody will say to me, you can't do it here, but I would say it's a methodology that should be considered for as many types of projects as you can, because you need to make a necessary change to a project at the right time, because that can save resources and ultimately helps deliver a successful project on time and within budget. It just gives you the information you need in a more timely manner. The goal really, when we're looking at continual improvement while looking through that lens of performance management, we should be continually monitoring the organization's performance against that predetermined criteria, not just annually. So often you hear people say, well, if I'd only known that then, I would have done this instead of this. Well, this is part of the reason why we need to be doing this iteratively, so that we can learn while we can, and actually make decisions in order to take advantage of opportunities that arise throughout the time of that project, whatever that project is. And so interim reports really, I think, are the most important for performance management, because then you can determine whether do you need some greater assurance on where we're going, or do we need to change our quality? Do we need to make a change in what we're doing? And so the idea of managing change and using the iterative or agile performance management approach really is a key aspect for overall continual improvement for your organization. So let's just do a quick touch here, and I wanted to ask you, to what extent does your organization evaluate its performance using an agile process or methodology? And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds for this. We're only giving you 3 choices, so you might be somewhere in between. Pick your best choice. About 10 more seconds. All right. It's really interesting to me that 8% of you said, what is agile? And I'm assuming that means that your organization isn't really doing agile for anything or you're not aware of it. It really is time, people, for us to start using agile processes wherever we can. I have also kind of confirmed that 75% of you say it's still only used, in more of a product development processing, which is where it started. But I'm also feeling okay about the fact that 70% of you say that 17% of you say that you're what you would call an agile organization and that you're using agile for everything. And so as we go through this presentation today, I would like to really leverage those people and for you to share in the post survey, what does it look like? And so what I would like to be, as we're planning for our webinars for next year, one of the things that we're trying to do is to make our webinars more interactive. And so we're going to be bringing in some guest speakers and doing kind of a podcast / webinar approach when we can. And we would love to be able to do some interviews of people, or at least if we can't interview you live and do something live, but be able to share ideas generically without sharing your name or your company name, but maybe just the industry that you're in order for us to give some examples in industry where we see this happening. Because when we say that in order to increase resilience, you need to be more agile and adaptive, this agile methodology being used within your organization, across the organization, is the enabler for doing that. It's a tool and methodology that can work from the top of your organization to the bottom of your organization. So having some examples of that would be really great. So let's move into the fact that most organizations, if not all, have some kind of an audit, and they use those audits to evaluate performance. And really the purpose of an audit program is to provide independent assurance that an organization's risk management, its governance, and internal control processes are operating effectively. Not every organization has an internal audit program. So you might have to bring someone else in from the outside, or you might have to do self-assessments. But this is what an audit program it looks like. And so auditors are trying to measure the effectiveness of the area being audited. There's a nice generic statement. But whether you're looking at to the extent of conformity of a system or systems being audited, to the capability of an area being audited, or just are we meeting our objectives? And with the outcome, the idea is you're supposed to be identifying areas for improvement. It's part of that continual improvement process. We know that audit programs are based on the size and nature of the organization, as well as if your organization is at a higher risk level or you're seeing some lower levels of performance, those might be triggers for needing an audit. So generally speaking, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but I want to put some perspective on what we're talking about, is you have 3 types of audits. And it's really that relationship between the auditor and the area being audited that provides the difference between them. So your first party audit is generally an internal audit conducted using internal resources or sometimes a consultant. A second party audit is most often called a supplier or subcontractor audit. So that you might be auditing your own suppliers or contractors to make sure they're meeting contractual requirements, or you might, as a supplier, might be being audited, or maybe you're auditing your suppliers and you're also being audited by the company that you're providing supplies to. So this is usually an external provider, as well as a third-party audit for certification or accreditation or something for compliance or regulatory issues. These are usually done by someone outside the organization. And so we're not going to address second or third party audits today. We're going to talk about the things that are within your control as an organization and just look at the internal audit process or the first party audit process. And interestingly, I was recently in Liverpool for some ISO meetings and trying to get the ISO world to look at the process for certification audits for management systems and how those might be done more iteratively versus annually. And I think that's not something that we're going to see happen in the near future, but I think it's important to start that conversation. So agile auditing supports really building that more agile organization. And we know that that methodology itself borrows from and repurposes agile principles and practices to meet the needs of internal auditors and their stakeholders. So Deloitte published a couple of years ago a really nice paper on agile internal audit planning and performance management. And this will be in the references that'll also be included when you get your certificate of attendance. I would recommend taking a look at that. It's really interesting. And so when you look at these principles and practices, they can be applied to the internal audit function, whether you're doing it as part of a change initiative or maybe to a specific internal audit activity as a way to start. So if you're on the audit side, maybe you're doing it as part of your audit planning, your field work, and your reporting yourself. But the question really becomes, what really is that trigger for deciding that your internal audit function should become more agile? And so obviously we all need to complete audits in less time, but also, just even within the same time, but getting more relevant data. Also, we're going to talk about how it promotes closer relationships with the people being audited. We need to be able to deliver relevant and higher impact reports. And I don't mean this less documentation like you're not documenting anything, but not just documenting for documentation's sake. But really, it's changing the mindset of the internal auditors to enable them to respond quickly and effectively as strategies and priorities and technologies, competitors, regulations, or whatever risks evolve. So the trigger for doing an internal audit might be something that's changed in your organization or changed externally. Obviously, when there's a regulatory requirement, that's a trigger for change. But I also want us to think bigger and broader to look at when changes are happening within your part of the organization, what might be the triggers that would help you to say, you know what, I think we could use an audit here, and let's work together to figure out what that audit looks like. So while agile auditing supports a more agile organization, the agile audit process also can be used to encourage auditors and stakeholders to determine upfront the value to be delivered by the audit and to collaborate on the audit outcomes. Like make your auditor your best friend. This is somebody who can help you maybe get what you want, get the change that you need, or at least somebody to come in and collaborate with you on how to improve the performance of whatever part of the organization that you're working in. Having these interim reports really help you to determine whether greater assurance or higher quality is needed, gives you something. It doesn't mean you have to throw away your annual audit, but these interim pieces become really of value to help you move in one direction or another as needed. Also, looking at prioritizing audits. So from the auditor perspective, being able to prioritize your schedule for auditing based on both the importance and urgency of the audit, as well as readiness to undertake that work. So if some part of the organization is not ready for an audit, then it can't be used as an excuse to avoid an audit. But we're trying to see the audit process as a tool to help you with improvement. And so having some idea of prioritization and urgency is important, as well as getting those parts of the organization that need to be audited ready for that. And so moving that focus of the audit itself from documentation of what the auditor has done to providing insights for improvement is really the goal here. And moving from this kind of annual schedule to have a continuous audit process with clear goals and objectives. Remember, these are going to be smaller things that you can do in a couple of hours or in a day or two, so that you've got those frequent communications on what you see is happening, so that your scope of your audit would also change. I did love this picture. When you kind of do a Google in Adobe or any other tools for changing of mindset, there's a great bit of animals. But I liked the one from the elephants who are generally looking down and using their trunks that are on the ground to moving and looking from the viewpoint of the giraffe who has a very different perspective than the elephant who really lives in the exact same environment. So the internal audit function must have a change in mindset and focus on the needs of the stakeholder to look at how we can accelerate the audit cycles, how can we drive timely insights, how can we get rid of waste and generating some of the documentation. Also, working together, you'll hear this, some of this is going to be repeated a couple times because it's important. Where you see the stakeholders and the auditors working together ahead of time to figure out what's the value going to be for this audit project. And so what are the risks that we see that we really want to take a look at in more detail? You're feeling a little unsure about a particular process and you need someone to come and take a look at it from an independent resource. And so looking at an audit from that perspective in order to produce the most value for the stakeholders and for the organization itself. It's kind of moving from a very formal approach to a fluid approach. And I know that sometimes auditors tend to be people who really like going from A to B to C and not changing and just, this is my job, let me do my job, and I'm going to be here. I'm not here to be your friend. But I think as we move to being a more agile organization, we'll talk about the importance of talent management and HR in hiring people who maybe have a more agile and flexible way of working within the audit structure itself. And so using some of the agile terminology, the agile internal auditor is going to maintain a backlog of audit risks. So kind of a list of areas to be audited. And then these have become your concludable areas if you want to use that terminology. And then you work together with the stakeholders who believe that that audit can yield a useful conclusion. Everybody's on board with why the audit needs to take place. And so really that key difference is the development and management of that list of what needs to be done, with that final product being that audit point of view or audit report. And using that agile audit methodology really helps to provide data and information more often and to deliver, like I said, more relevant, higher impact reports, enabling auditors and the stakeholders to respond much more quickly and effectively. And I'll say during change, which is all the time, which is why it's not like we're going to wait until the rate of change is even higher. Life is going to continue to move at a very fast pace. And so we just need to make sure that our methodologies and processes that we're using are keeping up with that pace. So kind of to summarize, this is what a typical audit or traditional audit looks like to more of an agile audit. You've got we'll call it perfect communication after a long process. That audit report really becomes the definitive piece of communication versus frequent communication during the whole audit process, before, during, and after. Where you've got more rigidly planned activities to having quick or iterative activities, where you're seeing comprehensive documentation, and instead you're moving to more timely and relevant documentation and reporting, where you've got established roles in that hierarchical system, to having more empowered roles in a more flexible system. Following a preset plan, this is how we do it, to having responsive or emerging needs, to auditing to internal resources, to being able to say, we're going to resource the internal audit based on the projects and the audits that we see that are needed. To me, this is a really key factor as to how resourcing is managed, and where the auditor has the control of the entire audit process, where there's now more transparency in the audit process. What I really think I would like ISO to start doing would be to, excuse me, and I do have allergies, I'm suffering today, document for us and for the internal audit community how an agile audit would work. And really, we have organizations like Ernst & Young and Deloitte giving us really good advice on how it should work, but I also think that ISO needs to step up and take a look at that and really formalize what it should look like. So looking at this shift in mindset or processes, what we're going to see is clearer outcomes. So moving away from those open-ended reviews or audits in search of findings, and instead have aims to confirm or disprove a hypothesis or to support a point of view. And so being able to target an outcome which guides the fieldwork and reporting, which then results in a shorter path to more insightful results. You'll also see increased engagement where the auditor is no longer feared, but part of the team. The auditor still needs to maintain objectivity while they're collaborating with stakeholders, but also you're going to have increased engagement when you prioritize the areas and issues and risk. And this really helps to identify needed resources and focus the work on the factors that determine business performance and value. And if your business strategy is changing, then certainly your audit practice needs to change. And so looking at engaging stakeholders earlier, and like we said before, more frequently. Looking at having improved documentation versus exhaustive documentation, to have those briefer, timely reports with fewer words and more visuals, because we really do need more frequent communication. And an enhancement in the audit planning. So rather than having these rigid audit plans, you're able to maintain a continually updated backlog of audits. So your audits and your projects to be undertaken have clear goals and resources tied to what are the changes that we're seeing in the organization. And so you can actually end an internal audit activity when you get to a point of diminishing returns where, okay, I think we've got all we need from this, we can end, versus saying, no, we have to continue going until we finish this project plan. So really looking at that flexibility. We also need to empower internal audit teams. But when you have those interim reports, both the team and the stakeholders can determine whether we need to move forward. If it's needed, the work continues. If it's not, it ends. And these decisions can then be made at the lower levels because senior people have established the parameters and the internal audit teams have their clear guidelines. And so teams can decide with the stakeholders on what to do, how much to do, and when to do it versus being driven by some policy that maybe isn't relevant anymore for the internal audit process. We talked about having those accelerated delivery cycles. So with the Agile project, with the Agile audit, you have internal auditors who are working within kind of time box sprints to complete a set of well-defined tasks. And those sprints themselves set that faster cadence for audits by setting out to provide a level of assurance, again, or to confirm a hypothesis rather than as the focus, we're going to document everything. And so this is where, again, you can see those accelerated audit cycle times and being able to redeploy your resources where they're needed. And hopefully the idea of this is that you're providing valuable insights by streamlining the work and the documentation. The frameworks themselves can focus on the internal auditor's attention to the trends, risks, challenges, and opportunities that can have the most impact on the organization and drive those insights. Because if the audit team is able to get through the organization in a quarter versus a year, they can now provide insights and see trends that might not be visible when we're all working in our own space. I don't want to use the word silos because we're trying to avoid that word, but we do end up working in silos, and even auditors work in silos. And so being able to work in a more agile manner would hopefully enable them to be able to see trends that maybe we can't see within our own vision. And just a reminder that agile auditing is not one size fits all. You don't just do a cafeteria style picking of how you're going to do this. Really, it needs to be an intentional decision on which agile audit method would work for your organization, and then stick to that. So pick your method, make changes to that method based on your objectives and the culture of your organization, and then implement your tailored approach. You know, this isn't a 1, 2, 3 progression. It's which one of these methodologies is going to work for the best for all of us, and how can we then modify those if we need to modify those to work for us. So I'm certain that at least 17% of you are going to say, to what extent does your organization use an audit an agile internal audit methodology, but we'll see if maybe some of the other ones are also doing that. So we've got kind of fully, sometimes never, or you just don't know. Maybe you're not a part of the organization that gets audited. And again, we'll give you about 30 seconds. All right. So interestingly, we have 53% of you that you see your organization using that approach, which is way higher than 17%. So that is really exciting because this is an area that I thought would be lower. So that information is really, really interesting. And so those of you that said sometimes, in the post survey, please document where you're seeing it used. Again, we're trying to see kind of how it's being used, excuse me, and just getting some insight from you on that would be really important. So thank you. So next we're going to talk about the finance function and really how the finance function has been changing over time and really most recently. Ernst & Young, Stephen Kruger says that finance needs to be enabled to deliver on current business demands and provide long-term benefits while keeping pace with change and future-proofing the organization all at the same time. And to do that, we really need traditional back office behaviors. The fact is that traditional back office behaviors, processes, and mindsets of finance are slowing the modernization of the finance function. And so it's kind of like we need to keep up with the times, people. That looking at the fact that the finance function should be helping us forecast and future-proof the organization, not just processing financial reports and looking at that. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Oracle put together a pretty interesting paper talking about how to build a more agile finance function. And so they looked at this with the different parts of the financial operations. So they looked at accounting operations, things like process management, your reports, your management information analysis, that end-to-end processing. And what they're suggesting that's done is that you migrate end-to-end processes to global service centers spanning traditional business disciplines, and you're going to hear this word a lot when we're talking about finance, try to automate to reduce costs and to raise the standards of the data that you're collecting. When you're looking at subject matter expertise, try to centralize subject matter expertise into integrated services, shared services, and things like centers of excellence. When you're looking at financial planning and analysis, which now they're trying to change to financial planning and analytics, because the finance function really needs to be looking at analytics and trying to implement things like a digital command center so that you're monitoring KPIs in real time. Obviously, big data is an enabler, and AI and some of the other tools are all enablers to help the finance teams to focus on making decisions and improving the shared understanding of how your current business model is generating value. And so analyzing performance to tackle performance issues promptly. And again, we're talking about redeploying resources in order to focus on better returns or prospects. And so we're seeing that word, how can we use our current resources more effectively as we see change happening? Looking at decision support and performance management. So how can we use cross-functional and uniquely skilled teams? So looking at how you can partner between finance and the business to ensure that decisions taken are based on the proper analysis of relevant information and performance, and that it's all managed in the interests of stakeholders. And finally, just developing your people, an investment in developing the necessary skills. One of the things that we're seeing is that current students who are studying finance are being, whether it's formally as part of their degree program or recommended, but to take some computer science to be able to understand how to do some data analytics as part of that traditional finance function. And if not, if you've got capable people who are there, investing and helping them develop their own skills in order to improve strategic influence and guidance for that. Ernst & Young talks about some key enablers, and they're mostly technical enablers to helping the finance function to become more agile, but we need to look at talent management as well as organization design for that. And that's a lot of what ICOR talks about, is that design and structure of your organization and how you're choosing your people. Obviously, digital processes and cybersecurity are enabling as well as providing some risk for some things. We have looking at how you can do some resource planning on a much larger basis. The Internet of Things has been around for a while, but so has intelligent automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. But the pace of change for this is amazing, and just using it as a tool to help you is hugely important. Obviously, the cloud and software as a service has also been around for a while, including blockchain, and having a distributed ledger can be helpful, as well as how do we use big data and advanced analytics to get us the information that we need. And so I don't know that many organizations 10 years ago looked at these things as part of the finance function. And so they need to be. And so therefore, how you manage your talent and how you keep your people and what kinds of tools that you're using to enable them and automate things, like I said, like Ernst & Young says, those are enablers to help this move from traditional to more agile for the finance function as well. So to what extent has your finance function gone digital by implementing analytics, competency centers, integrated business services, or communications and control centers at your organization? And because of the limit on words, I couldn't get the whole question into the poll. But, has your organization done this fully, somewhat, not at all, or you're just not sure because you're not part of the finance function? All right, we'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right. I have to say, all of your answers to the polls today have really got me intrigued. That 14% of you, now this is 17% of you said that you're gone agile all the way, but these are specific things within the finance function. To have 14% be fully is really impressive. And I was surprised that there weren't more of you that were unsure, just because, they're not traditionally, we don't necessarily see a lot of finance people on our webinars. But the fact that almost half of you have done these things somewhat is really, really encouraging. And so again, if you could please share what that looks like, that would be amazing. So thank you. So our final piece of this, which I always consider either the most important or most relevant to people, or the most painful, depending on how you feel about personnel performance management. And I think this is one that I think we can have really quick wins on more easily than perhaps the finance side of things. But the typical, and this is, by the way, SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, is a really great site if you want to learn more about personnel performance management and how to make that more agile. There's some great tools in there that are free to people who aren't members of SHRM as well. But the purpose, there's a lot of P's in here, the purpose of personnel performance management should include a commitment to improving individual performance in a way that supports organizational priorities. So we're going to look at this from administrative as well as a developmental perspective. So on the administrative side, it helps make compensation decisions like your pay, your bonuses, or any incentives. It identifies people who might be ready to take on new opportunities like promotions or new assignments. It also provides protection or documentation to defend against any sort of legal challenges. It can hold poor performers accountable for their improvements, gives you some data for any adverse impact analysis that you might have. And then on the development side, it identifies training and development needs, provides career guidance and developmental opportunities, enhances communication and relationships among employees and managers, ensures employees receive effective feedback, and really increases employee engagement and empowers employees to take greater ownership of their performance goals. So this is from SHRM, which is pretty much the association that looks at personnel performance management, both from the administrative and developmental side. So the question is, why move away from annual or semi-annual appraisals? Well, we really need to move back to people development. And we know that one of the biggest costs to organizations is people leaving. And so if you want people to stay, you've got to figure out a way to keep them. And so putting your employees in charge of their own growth is one way to do that. And it requires not just feedback, but really good feedback from their supervisors, which depends on frequent informal check-ins rather than by those more formal annual reviews. And again, we're not saying about getting rid of them, but we're saying having more of them. Because there's that need for agility, we're seeing innovation as a source of competitive advantage, which results in continual change. And most of you are working on projects that are short-term and tend to change along the way. So your goals and tasks can't be plotted out a year in advance with a lot of accuracy. The basic things that you might be doing stay the same, but a lot of the nuts and bolts of what you're doing is changing. So the goal is to push more frequent conversations or touch points and really asking the questions, what am I doing that I should keep doing, and what am I doing that I should change? And of course, we know the centrality of teamwork, that we need to track performance on a team level and track collaboration. And so looking at moving short-term goals that are aligned with the natural cycle of work and making sure that communication occurs when projects finish and when their milestones are reached, or when challenges occur, we just pause and we say, we need to relook at this. And so focusing on goals and strengths, not just past performance. So when you're enabling continual improvement within that agile performance management, what can we do? How can we learn from this? Essentially, we need that collaborative continuous feedback and development. We need to have a dynamic performance evaluation process that can evolve and adapt according to the changes that you're seeing, with continual improvement as the focus. So having frequent feedback versus annual feedback, visible goal or flexible goals versus rigid goals, have that collaborative environment versus the dictator type of approach, to focus on your growth versus focus on what you've delivered, and to have supportive leadership versus bossy leadership. So when we're moving from that shift from traditional to more agile, we see that traditional is designed for more hierarchical environments where we need to now be looking at more of a collaborative environment. So traditional focuses on appraisal, agile focuses on development and forward-looking performance. I mean, my goodness, wouldn't you want to stay working for somebody who is trying to help you be a better employee and takes your engagement for that? It's a much better piece than worrying about what they're going to say about you at your annual or semi-annual appraisal. Kind of twice a year appraisal conversations versus having regular check-ins. I mean, just think, you finish a project or in the middle of a project and you see something that you could do differently, being able to share that and get recognized for that, both within your team and within people that you work for. Traditionally, you have goals set annually versus having goals that can shift if priorities shift. Having very little lead back to having feedback versus having regular feedback. I do think, I'm not saying training courses for development aren't great, because that's how we make our money, but also subsidizing that with more use of coaching and just-in-time learning that you can take right then, where traditional performance management sometimes has a very limited scope, and instead using more crowdsourcing, which we're going to share an example of what that looks like. Some of the key benefits: it helps to quickly realign employee performance according to short-term business opportunities, which enables more profitability. It establishes that regular feedback channel, so employees are always informed about how they are performing, and this really helps with transparency. Now, I do have to say, if you're the person having to measure performance of personnel and you have people working for you, it might take more time, but if it becomes part of your daily operations, then it actually reduces the time that you're spending on those annual or semi-annual appraisals. Also decouples performance reviews from the annual appraisal. So looking at performance versus appraisal. So looking at how you're doing separately for how you're getting paid or what you're getting paid. So that employees can focus on innovation and not incentives, which helps increase their motivation. I do say we all do want to get paid more all the time, but giving the employees feedback in the moment and then asking them to respond or counter or whatever that statement is also increases that collaboration. And so when we look at what might agile organizations want to do to move to more of an agile personnel performance management system, and linking personal goals to business priorities, we've talked about that a lot in our webinars. We're talking about individual purpose with organizational purpose, just making people feel like what I'm doing day to day is directly tied to how the business operates and what makes the organization successful. So having team objectives in addition to or instead of individual targets or objectives, setting objectives as a team, and discussing the results frequently, and again, if you need to pivot as required, and helping to create that transparency of the targets and performance. And it allows you to celebrate too, because you're all aware that you've met something or more than met something, which means we have to invest in coaching skills for our managers. We need to be very clear on the roles that leaders play in development and evaluation, that they understand how to focus on continuous feedback and those ongoing development conversations that are much less formal and much more friendly, and being able to collect input from multiple sources when evaluating performance. And some of you might use the 365 type of tool as well. That's been around for a while. But I also think many of you would appreciate having the ability to differentiate consequences. So when you're looking at individual contributions to team performance, I think some of you who contribute a lot would like to be recognized for that, but also increase the emphasis on intrinsic motivation as well as non-monetary rewards as well. What kinds of incentives can help you, like just having a flexible work schedule or flexible where to work schedule might mean more to you than a small increase in your pay. So just to finish up, and I think I might go a minute or two over because I wanted to include this example. So this is a company that's using an agile approach for all parts of their company. And they've decided that they're going to expand their business in China. And so they've communicated that strategic direction to the chapters and tribes and their leads and say, we will be in China next year. Then those goals are assigned to one particular tribe. And those leads provide feedback and further shape that goal itself. And they say, we're going to achieve X number of sales in China by the end of the year, and Jason is going to lead this. Then they translate that project into tribe, chapter, and individual objectives by key results, and say that we're going to have our first office, or we're going to have our office opened and our first customer in China by the end of the quarter, and Mary's going to take care of the opening of the office, and John's going to take care of the business development. So then that project is assigned to a particular squad, and the project owners provide feedback and further shape the tribe and chapter goals. And Mary says, we're going to open our first office by the end of the quarter. And then tangible OKRs are set, and they say we're going to hire X people and Y functions, have regulatory requirements, XYZ fulfilled, have an office space rented, and all the IT infrastructure bought and set up by the end of the quarter. And then the chapter leads or the project owners meet with the individuals to set their goals. So you're going to assess individuals against the business goals and their desired behavioral attributes, and looking at and then making sure that you're meeting with these people to do that. And so here you've got that cross-functional squad for opening the office. You've got a project owner who's meeting with the individual squad members, whether they're in sales or government relations, supply chain, HR, IT, or whatever, to set those goals. So now we're going to drill down to Mary. So Mary is going to compile an exposure list from the people that she's had significant interactions with. This is part of her personnel performance during the cycle review. And her list is going to include some description of the type of interactions that she's had and her chapter lead is going to approve her list. So then Mary holds regular one-on-one interactions with her chapter lead to discuss the achievement of her OKRs. And one of the things that she found is that it's taking longer than expected to hire people, as the HR lead had to leave due to a family emergency. So something outside of her control is going to impact her ability to meet some of those goals that she set up. And then Mary's chapter lead sources feedback from her list, her exposure list, ensuring that leaders and peers and subordinate all provide input, part of that 365 look at how Mary's doing, and answering the questions. Can you tell me about your experience working with Mary? What impact does she have on the teams, or whatever questions that are asked as part of that process? And then the chapter lead summarizes Mary's performance and recommends some kind of a rating, and says, in summary, Mary opened the office with a 1-month delay. However, she retained the same contractors, and our next office will be open ahead of time. Mary's chapter lead then presents her case in a calibration, sorry, I used the wrong word there, and updates her memo accordingly and asks the question, is this enough to justify a top performer? And Mary receives her maybe formal executive feedback when her chapter lead presents the calibrated results and says, congratulations, Mary, you've achieved your goals in the cycle, whatever that time cycle is, and let's get into the details of that. So this is just an example of what this might look like, and I'm sure at your organizations you have your own process, but this is an example for those of you that maybe don't have anything about agile performance management at your organization. So to kind of summarize and finish up our webinar today, to what extent has agile performance management been implemented at your organization? It's interesting, I'm seeing a little bit different results here than what we've seen before. All right, about 10 more seconds. All right. Actually, people are still voting, so give me I'll let you keep voting. All right, let's go ahead and share that. Here that sometimes matches pretty much what we just saw for the finance function. Almost 30% of you not sure. So if you're not sure, my guess would be that it isn't happening where you're working. Otherwise, you might have chosen sometimes. And so here is where the people that are doing fully and sometimes would be really great to see what that looks like, because those of us that are not sure or never could really benefit from that. And I guess if I was in today's world, if I was looking for a job, I would want to ask the questions, how will my performance be evaluated? And I would want to work for a company that's using more of an agile approach versus the annual or semi-annual approach. I actually think if I was in the job market, that would be something I would be looking at carefully, because how we're evaluated impacts our job satisfaction, and it impacts the engagement and what it is that you're happy with and what it is that you're really unhappy with, which impedes how you do your job. So I think sometimes this question has been underestimated as to its impact on the employees. So to summarize, measuring performance is an essential aspect of continual improvement. An agile audit is a tool for measuring performance and managing change. The finance function should provide data to streamline decision-making on performance and to provide strategy to the organization. And we all hope that organizations will implement an agile performance management process to ensure that continual improvement and employee engagement. It does look like we're out of questions, and I don't see any in here, so please add any questions that you might have in the post-webinar survey. We will share these references, so there are some really good references in here that I found interesting to read as well. We didn't necessarily include all of them in this webinar, but there's some that you might want to take a look at. Just a reminder, we do have our education program as well as certification program for those who want to be a leader in resilience. Next month, we'll be talking about, is this where we want to be? Are the right people working on the right stuff in the right workplace, kind of looking at workplace um, as part of this, which I think might be a topic for many of you. And please contact us to learn more. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.